The DC Breeze travel here to Pittsburgh to take on the Thunderbirds in a cross-divisional matchup here in the AUDL. Coming up next, we will see the opening pull. Charlie Eisenhood here with Matt Weiss on the play-by-play. And Matt, we've got a compelling matchup here. The DC Breeze looking for an important win as we get underway here in Pittsburgh.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, and DC Breeze with a lot to play for, and the Thunderbirds looking to get off the schneid. They have only won one game since the start of the season, and that was their opener against Detroit. Looking in the action now, we've got Blake with the disc in the middle of the field, and facing a man-to-man from the Thunderbirds. Shot up the line. Xavier Maxtat, former Thunderbird, has it. He airs it out. Alex Thomas in pursuit, and he gets a diving block on the home cone. And the Thunderbirds will take over possession. So a nice start for the T-Birds. They definitely knew, I talked to their coach before the game, that Xavier would be inclined to throw that, and he's going to be getting a lot of touches today. So they were waiting for it and got what they wanted. Now the disc in the hands of Jordan Robar sends it back to Pat Mack. He's marked by Maxtat. That's a big size mismatch, and he throws an inside out up to AT, Alex Thomas. Quickly double teamed. Not a super experienced thrower, but he finds a way out of it, finds Mack up the line, and he airs out an inside out. Trucks Trimble and Holland underneath it. Trimble tracking it, and Holland gets his hand on it first. This just kind of hung up there in the wind, and the wind here, Charlie, is swirly. All sides of the stadium are open, and the Thunderbirds have remarked on that. It's a hard stadium to play in sometimes.
Yeah, you can see a couple early speculative hucks not landing for either team, and perhaps the wind playing an early role.
Might see another one right now from Kerrigan. He kind of jacks an air bounce backhand, but it's to the break side, and Holland has no company as Trucks Trimble comes to join him. He sends it back to Blake, forcing him into the middle of the field, and he sends it way back, loses some yardage to Holland, who we were told by Coach Darryl Stanley is going to be getting a lot of touches today. Disc is shuffled up to Blake. He's playing catch with Zach Norbaum. Thunderbirds trying to hold on here. They had an opportunity for a break, and it would be nice to start one. Probably not going to come from this guy, though, and that's Nate Pryor. He's been a rock-steady handler. He gets the strike cut up the line, and he's got a wide-open receiver in the end zone. That's Kyle Khalifa. And DC holds and takes the lead, 1-0. 9:53 left in the first quarter.
Yeah, solid despite the turnover. Good work from the DC offense, especially in the absence of Matthew McDonald. That's going to be something we have to pay attention to today. Their star player who leads the team in both plus-minus, assists, and goals out with a hamstring, and he will not appear in today's game. And that's going to be a challenge for the Breeze, even against this Pittsburgh team that sits at 1-7 and 5th place in the Midwest.
And especially when you're used to relying on somebody as much as they are on McDonald. And I was not as familiar with his work before I looked at some of the highlights from their upset win over Raleigh back in Week 7. And it's safe to say that he was the spark plug for that win. Without him, I don't think they're even close against that very stacked Raleigh team. So that's the difference he makes, and they're going to have to adjust today. So far, it looks like they're doing a pretty good job. John Mast gets a pass from Kenny Fridella and then sends it up into the middle to Ethan Beardsley, who is the most reliable of the Thunderbirds in terms of attendance. He has, I think, only missed one game in his career as a Thunderbird. Now Jonathan Mast, another rock-steady handler, has to look off Max Shepard and instead laces an inside out up to Fridella, who rips one, and he's got Beardsley all alone. And Beardsley pulls it in the end zone. It's 1-1. Thunderbirds strike back. Nice. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, quick score from the Thunderbirds. Nice offense.
It's hard to imagine how you lose a guy like Ethan Beardsley behind you. He is a guy who a few years ago in his the debut season for the Thunderbirds led the AUDL in goals, and he just added another one to his total. So Thunderbirds have had a problem this year falling behind early, digging themselves a hole, and one of the things on Coach Pat Hammond's list of things not to do was to get into that same hole today. So that's a very much welcome hold, and now we get to see the Thunderbirds D team back on the field and see what they can do. Both teams scoring in the east end zone, which is the direction the wind is blowing, if you can see from the flags out there. So no upwinders yet, but a nice pull. Disc settles down into Norbaum's hands, and he finds Maxtat. We know he likes to throw it deep, and he's facing a zone that Charlie, the D2 team, has played not with a ton of success this year for the Thunderbirds. And the idea is just see if you can get him to do something untoward with the disc, something a little impulsive and impatient.
You can see that they're clogging the lanes, sitting players back into the standard throwing lanes, forcing a lot of lateral motion. Obviously, easy passes back and forth for the offense, but a lot more difficult to move it downfield. Yes,
and they have had some success periodically in getting teams to get a little impatient and to sometimes jack one, and that's what they're looking for. But, and that one was a turnover because John Buss intercepted a pass that was intended for Holland up through the middle. So sort of the thing that they're looking for. Now the disc in the hands of Robarge, and he throws up a lame duck. The only hope there was for it to bounce off of Xavier's hands.
A lame duck is right. Really just didn't really get much power behind the throw the way that he wanted.
Yeah, I think it might have been one, if you're not set to throw it, and that's not a job as a D-team handler that he does all the time, then maybe pull it back. There are tricky winds out here, and he just didn't seem ready to throw that. I think we've all done it once or twice, just turned over a duck, but that was a bad time to do it because a break opportunity would mean a lot. You can see the zone that Charlie was just talking about, just sagging into those throwing areas and making these guys play catch. You've got Ryan Ciccolini up there and Justin Peach Kincaid in the middle of it. Steve May out here on the wing. And Jack Heffron. You see Blake coming in to handle.
And that's the throw that they're looking for. I was just getting ready to say that they're not switching the field well, and that's where you're going to get the throwing lanes to open up because you move the defense, and there's so much width on this AUDL field. You got to take advantage of that against a zone that's trying to just pin you down in the backfield.
Absolutely. Of course, there's always the risk, especially close to the end zone, that a throw like that Xavier just sent across field could catch an updraft and find itself going out of bounds. And really, you only need one break there. You see Peach hustling over to try to cut off the easy give and go between the handlers, but they do get it going. Now Kerrigan's got it. And DC demonstrating real patience against this zone. Back deep in the zone, you've got Felipe Delgado. And anchoring it at the back looks like Jordan Robarge. So just at midfield, a lot of passes thrown. Speaking of passes thrown, I know that you were just down at College Nationals, and there was a point we should talk about a little later in, I think it was maybe the Colorado-Dartmouth game.
Yes.
Or Stanford-Dartmouth, beg your pardon, where, 240 completions before Dartmouth finally scored.
That's right.
So
going up against a similar zone to the one we're seeing from the Thunderbirds, a containment zone that is looking to mostly force you to throw a lot of passes.
So far, the breeze looks like they're equal to it. They're willing to be patient. But, with a zone like this, you get your one turn and you have to capitalize, and the Thunderbirds didn't. So if they get lucky, they'll squeeze another one out here. But it's one of those things where I think, and there you go, you get the quick pass from Pryor, who's so steady to them, and we'll get the number of the receiver who caught that one. Looks like number 87. That's Kerrigan. So 2-1 and a very patient possession. Matt Kerrigan with the reception on the goal. And we're about halfway through the first period and just 1-2, so 3 scores. Doesn't look like it's going to be a barn burner by the looks of it so far, but good patience shown by DC against that zone. They're not going to see it every time. They're going to see it when the second defensive team is on the field, and they'll have to make that adjustment back and forth between. Charlie, did you get a chance to see that point?
I did. I was sitting and watching as in the semifinals of the Women's College Championships, Dartmouth threw 243 passes.
That was the number I heard,
the completion.
And was that all in one possession? Was there a turnover beat?
There were some turnovers, but I think that was one continuous possession on that point.
Right.
And
wow.
Yeah, it was something to watch. They just dinked and dunked for a very long time. The total point lasted, I believe, over 15 minutes.
Wow. And, if you watched, and I hope people did, watch that college national tournament, which was just some terrific play, particularly from some of our Pittsburgh teams. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But when you've got a player like Jacqueline Verjus, it's tempted just to throw it up to her. just like it's tempting to throw it right up to Alexander Fall. He is a rookie this year and a product of, I had him confused actually with another rookie who we're going to talk about later, I'm sure. But Fall is a nice receiver, open in the back of the end zone, and DC pulls out to a 2-goal lead. Pittsburgh giving one up when Jonathan Mass was unable to corral a swing pass. And Charlie, that's the kind of mistake that the Thunderbirds have been making all season. You know, not being outplayed, not being outmuscled or, overmatched in athleticism. Just a pass to a handler that's a little bit too high, and he was unable to come down and pull it down. And that's a routine sort of throw you have to make if you're going to compete in a league with a lot of skilled players. You don't see DC doing that.
That's been the challenge for the Thunderbirds this season. Is just a missed pass here, a missed pass there. Not quite the same punch out there on the offensive line that they had a year ago. And it also makes it more difficult to defend when you're asking more of players who maybe aren't natural fits for the offensive line.
For sure. And, of course, an offensive team, even if they do get the turnover and get another shot, you wear down. And you've got 2 D-lines, but it doesn't take long before that O-line, if it has to play a lot of defense, loses some effectiveness. So we'll see what the Thunderbirds' offensive team is able to do here. This is a sort of second offensive team that we're seeing. We've got one shuffled up to Scott Trucks Trimble, who can play both ways. Sends it backwards to John Buss. And then he launches one deep. Trimble running underneath it. It's going to hang up, and he should be able to catch up to it. He is being defended quickly by Delrico Johnson, who is a defensive standout. And then this one, again, a miscommunication between, it looks like, Felipe Delgado and his receiver, Jordan Robarge, and the disc falls harmlessly in the end zone, and that absolutely should have been a hold for the Thunderbirds, and now they're going to have to play defense.
Slight miscommunication. Sometimes that's all it takes is one cutter to just stop their motion. As we see an enormous foot block.
It sure was. Alex Liu had it looking to make a routine swing, and Scott Trucks Trimble just kicks out a shoe, and the disc ends up in the end zone. And Pat Mack is going to pick this one up and see if McMullen can steal one for the Thunderbirds. That's a big break and a heads-up or foots-up play for Trimble. Oh, disc nearly bobbled by Fridella. He goes down the line, which opens up a counter cut by Delgado. He's got it on the goal line, sends it up to Alex Thomas, and he makes it much more interesting than he needs to. But A.T., I promised him I'd call him Alex A.T. Big Papa Thomas comes down with a lunging two-handed grab in the end zone, and the Thunderbirds pull within one. But, it's that kind of sloppy play. Even there, it worked out. But it certainly doesn't look like clockwork.
Yeah, that's not necessarily sustainable over the course of a 48-minute game. And, I think that's one of the reasons that you see this Thunderbirds team, which made the playoffs last year, finishing third in the Midwest Division, looking like they're basically out of it. They would have to go on a miraculous run. They'd have to pretty much win out from here. That would leave them finishing 7-7, and they'd need some help from some of the other teams in the division. It's really just not. It's not going to happen.
And with Indy at 7-1 right now, and Madison being Madison, Minnesota being Minnesota, even the Thunderbirds aren't talking about that. But what they are talking about, and I talked to Pat Hammonds, who was a player and a standout player on the Thunderbirds for a long time, and is now the coach, replacing their longtime coach Dave Hogan, who had been with the team since it started. He said, "Look, right now we know that we're not who we've been. And we're just trying to figure out who we're going to be. And we're playing for ourselves right now. Right now, they're playing an ineffective zone against the DC team that is off to the races. And it's Holland playing catch. Disc is in the middle of the field to Khalifa right now. Still in that zone, chasing across the field. Pryor with the disc right now. Directing traffic. And he goes to the break side. It's sent out. He missed his intended target, which was Norbaum, but an alert heads-up Xavier Maxtat filled in behind, laid out, caught the disc, and DC regains its 2-goal lead with 3:50 left in this first quarter. So an opportunity there perhaps, but boy, DC went through that zone like a hot knife through proverbial butter.
Xavier Maxtat making a very athletic play to come up with that one and showing you that he can get it done both in the backfield and in the end zone.
Yeah, it's true. I like to say I'm a handler by trade, and this We started our summer league. Everybody loves to play summer league. When we introduced ourselves, I said, I'm a handler. I haven't been in the other team's end zone since 2007. And I think that's probably what Xavier Maxtat might be able to say until that play. And he saw an opportunity, he took it, and he put his team up by 2. You know, Charlie, you were talking about how this is a different Thunderbirds team. It certainly is. I was this morning sort of making a list in my head of the players who aren't here, who have been here in the past, and you could make quite an AUDL starting 7 out of that list of players. We'll talk about them in a moment, but let's talk about the guys on the field right now. Jonathan Mast is one of them, and he sends an ill-advised inside out looking for Sam Van Duzen, but he didn't find Van Duzen. Instead, he found Joe Richards of the DC Breeze. And we got Corey Broyles with the disc, a little left-handed forehand up to Walden. Walden fakes the hammer, continuing to work to the break side. Del Rico Johnson's got it. And then Walden trying to do a little work on Jonathan Mast, a little strike cut, and he tried to throw him a very difficult inside out, and Sam Van Duzen does not hesitate. He rarely hesitates, especially when he sees the orange cleats of number 1, Max Shepard, and that's a darn near full field huck from Sam Van Duzen, the lefty laser. He can do that pretty much any time from any place on the field, and he loves Max Shepard as a receiver. So the Thunderbirds pull back within 1, their first O team doing what it needed to do.
That great throw from Van Duzen.
It's funny, if you're used to watching this team, then watching Van Duzen reminds you a lot of watching one of those guys who I mentioned who isn't here, and that's Patrick Earls, another lefty, another shooter.
Absolutely. They have similar power. Earls maybe with a little bit more throwing prowess, Van Duzen with a little bit more defense, but you can't miss the comparison. You know, even if they weren't lefties, you might notice it. But with the left-handed ability to throw the disc down the field, it's an obvious match. And you know, Pat Earls, somebody that they'd love to have tonight.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that it'd be a spirited argument over which one of them is more handsome. I know both of those guys, and neither one of them lacks for confidence. Pull falls way short, about 20 yards outside the goal line, and it's centered to Pryor. Pryor swings it out to Maxtat, who surveys the downfield, and he does send one. We knew he would. Khalifa's his target, and I don't think that Pat Hammonds is unhappy with that choice. He told me before the game, listen, we're going to force them to the outside, and we are going to try to tempt their handlers to make some choices that maybe they shouldn't. Now the question becomes, do you leave this D team on the field, or do you maybe put the O team on the field? The AUDL gives you that option with the timeout. Looks like, for right now at least, Coach Hammonds is going to trust this team to get it done. He's not getting a lot of help downfield. Here's a fill cut from AT, and fortunately...
And there's the timeout that you were calling for.
There we go.
And I think you could have maybe called a foul there against DC, but either way, Pittsburgh comes up with it, and I think the coaching staff making the right choice to take that timeout, talk about it, and get their offense on the field.
Just one of the differences between the kind of ultimate that you see in the AUDL and what you're used to if you're used to playing or watching the ultimate that's played in other places, particularly USAU Club Ultimate, that you can shuffle those teams onto the field when you need an offensive lift. And I think that sometimes coaches like to save those timeouts and also see, can we preserve momentum? We just got a block. Do we have these guys back on their heels? After all, we're now playing offense against their D team. That's an advantage. But if it stalls or it starts to get a little bit dicey, and it certainly just did, if Mark Fedorenko, the captain, hadn't been there to pull down that errant pass, then the Thunderbirds would have squandered another opportunity. So they're going to send out Van Duzen, steady receiver like Ethan Beardsley. Fedorenko is going to stay on the field. Max Shepard, who does so much transition offense from handle to deep and back. John Mast, of course, who's their anchor, and Kenny Fردella, who often plays on D1 but is stepping over today to play offense. And so that's what they'll see. We're going to counter on DC with Reese Bergeron, the younger of the two Bergeron brothers here. His brother Quinn is here as well. And Del Rico Johnson, who is a standout, as I said, Alex Liu. And then in the backfield, Thaw, Swift, number 5, Brad Scott. And then over on the far side, we've got the other Bergeron, and that's Quinn Bergeron. So let's see if the timeout does the Thunderbirds any good. We're going to start out with Mast in the double team, and we're in play. Disc is shuffled back to Shepard. He laces one up the line to Van Duzen. Looking deep, and he's got a target in Ethan Beardsley. Can he get it up in the air enough? Beardsley moves towards it. He almost always wants to find a backwards throw, and he does, to Fedorenko. Looks like Van Duzen didn't get the throw he wanted to, but he barely got it there. Fedorenko looks off a strike cut, which was covered. Mast has it in the middle of the field. He sends a break throw to Van Duzen. He didn't have company for a while. Thunderbirds go to a vertical stack, and it's a break throw, a really nice one into the corner on that righty backhand, lefty forehand side. They break and they even the score as Mark Fedorenko pulls it down. That was a nice sequence by the Thunderbirds, and that timeout paid off.
Great offense from the Thunderbirds. Break mark throws, opening things up, and that puts them back even here. And, you know, it's only the first quarter, but Pittsburgh playing pretty even so far. And I think it's worth noting that, you know, Pittsburgh doesn't have much incentive to win this game besides pride. This is DC's first matchup against a Midwest team, maybe seeing a different style, but this is a game that they need to win. They're sitting at 3-4-1. They have a tie against Philly earlier in the year.
That's right.
They're fourth in the East, but they're right in the mix. Toronto's way above everyone. They're going to get the first seed without problem. They wouldn't even have to try to get the first seed at this point. But, you know, DC could make the playoffs. They could miss the playoffs. And getting a win here against a team that's clearly been struggling this season is going to be important. And right now, we're even on breaks.
Absolutely. And I talked to their coach before the game, and he talked about last week's very big win against New York, pass getting laced up to Holland through that zone. And he pointed out that he was absent for that game. Kerrigan pulls down an overhead, finds him at midfield as they continue to work against this zone, moving laterally as you talked about. They're a little bit of a counter throw. And then this one is yanked across the field, and it's got a little bit too much on it, and that's the kind of impatience that the zone is asking for.
Maxstad has the vision to try to make that throw, but he also is going to sometimes burn you with the turnover in that situation.
Yep, giveth and taketh away, and this one is another lucky break for the Thunderbirds. Looks like we're going to have a call on the field. We had Jack Heffron there, and there was some contact between him and Khalifa, but it looks like that call is going to go against DC.
Under a minute to go now in the first quarter, and no stoppage here from the referees, so Pittsburgh going to have to hustle.
Yeah, we might be looking at a last shot situation, and we might also get a...
And now they do want to stop the clock.
And then we might get a clock reset. We'll see what happens.
I think you're right.
John Mass saying hi to his friend Xavier and Maxstad while they sort everything out. And it looks like Peach is going to come out of the game a little bit shook up. Of course, players can move on a stop disc in the AUDL. John Mass throws it to his partner in handling back there, Jordan Robar. She goes up the line. That's cut off, so it's a reset into the middle of the field to the Bogota Bullet, Felipe Delgado. Now Mast has it. Mast sends one up the line. And a little bit of a premature layout there, it looked like to me, from Cicilline. And it looked like he was into his layout before the disc got there, and he had to reach up and grab it. But we got Blake going the other way. A little bit less than 30 seconds. This one in the end zone. A lot of crowd company under there, and pulled down, making sure with 21 seconds left is Robarge. And now, you're right about that. They really do have to get moving. Charlie, they've got 15 seconds left, and we could end up with a jump ball situation. They definitely are going to want it in the hands of Bus or somebody at least at midfield who can get this into the end zone. Delgado sends it, and it's got the distance. There are receivers underneath it, a little jostling underneath. It's going to stay in bounds, reaching up and pulling it down. And the referee signal goal, and that big pile of bowling pins over there is number 84, Jack Heffron. So a great way to end the quarter for the Thunderbirds. They had the disc and were planning to just walk it up, but an errant pass led to a turnover. Big D by Ferdella in the end zone. I'm sorry, let me correct that. And let's say that's Robarge. And then they found an unlikely hooker in Delgado. That's not usually his job, but he had an open backhand. He put enough underneath it, and big Heffron pulls it down.
Yeah, you see it again here. Heffron just goes up over the top, had the best read on the disc, and he brings it down for the score.
And we're looking at the scoreboard right now. It says 4-4. I might have lost track of the score there, Charlie. Is that our correct score?
No, it should be 5-4. Pittsburgh
yeah.
taking the lead there at the end of the first.
So you're right. You know, it's interesting. You said they have nothing to play for but pride. But of course, since this is my home team and I know these guys well, they have a lot of pride. And you know, it's been a trying year for them. And they really, I think, are tired of hearing about all the players who aren't here. And they want to give people something to talk about and a reason to come out. Speaking of a reason to come out, and this is exciting for both of these teams, this is not their last game of the weekend. Tomorrow, they're going to be playing a mixed game out at Founders Field, which was the second season home of the Thunderbirds. And DC has brought with them a mixed team, and the Thunderbirds have put together a team they're calling Supercell. And some top-notch women's players will be joining the top half of the Thunderbirds roster. Guys on both rosters who have mixed ultimate experience, and it'll be 10 men, 10 women going at it tomorrow in a challenge match, and it's exciting, and I'm hoping we're going to get a big crowd out there tomorrow, and I would encourage everybody to come out. We'll also be live streaming it.
That's great, and I wish I could stick around. Unfortunately, my flight out in the morning is going to preclude me from staying for the game tomorrow afternoon, but it's another part of what we've seen this year, which is an increased appearance of women in various AUDL functions, and whether that's a mixed game or whether that is seeing women on the field during the game. We've seen that from various teams so far this year, and it's clear that that's becoming an important push for some of these teams, and Supercell clearly closely working with the Thunderbirds to make that happen.
Well, I ran into some Supercell players last night, and they are really excited because this is a different kind of Ultimate. You can play at Club Nationals and not have the same experience that you do playing in a stadium in front of a crowd, your home crowd in the one-game format, and I know they're looking forward to that, and I think it already feels like a team to them. Sam Van Duzen launches one cross field. There's a lot of folks underneath this one, but the Thunderbirds have back position, and everybody jumps too early except for one guy, and that's Alexander Fall. He comes up with it, and DC takes over. Laying out is Delrico Johnson, and the referee, Mike Gorham, signals that it is up. Disc is launched by Austin Bartenstein, and then underneath it, we got Kenny Fridella and Walden. Fridella jumps up and makes an artful defensive play, managing to get that left hand over the shorter Walden, and the Thunderbirds will pick it up and try to go in the other direction. And their O team gets a second chance. Hopefully they will not squander it. And there is Sam Van Duzen launching another one of those patented hucks. The wind's behind it, and Mark Fedorenko catches up to it. Referee signals he's not in, checks it in at the goal line. Max Shepard throws it out into space, and it is tracked down by number 22, Owen Watt, goals leader for the Thunderbirds. And Pittsburgh opens up what I would say is a surprising, at this point, 2-goal lead.
Absolutely surprising. I don't think anybody expected that Pittsburgh was going to be in front in this game and look like they were playing as the better team. And that's what we've seen so far.
What do you think it is that they're doing that's frustrating DC?
Well, first of all, Sam Van Dusen is opening up the field and giving them some punch on offense that they really need. Number two, I think that they're just playing a little bit sharper. They had a couple of early miscues, but we've seen that from both teams. And DC clearly missing Matthew McDonald, among others. Jeff Wodach also not here. So their offense missing a couple of key parts. And I think that you're seeing that affect their offensive attack so far.
And when you have to move somebody over, like Holland,
it's downstream. Mm-hmm. It affects your defense.
It absolutely
as well.
does, and we've seen that because, it's not that Van Duzen is dropping dimes to covered receivers. These guys are guys who are streaking open, and that suggests that there's a mix-up, and big number 80 for the Breeze is somebody who might be back there, but he isn't right now, and the Thunderbirds have taken advantage. Close mark by Trimble, but the disc is swung by Blake to Pryor. He laces one out, and there's Holland with the disc. Alex Thomas on him. Shot over Pryor's head. He panicked for a second. Didn't see Maxstat back there. Maxstat did see his receiver going deep, and he's got Kerrigan. Kerrigan catches up to it, but can't catch it.
And that's a similar throw to what we just saw from Van Dusen, of course, on the right-hand side for Maxstat. That was a completion for the Thunderbirds, but here for the Breeze, a turnover.
And it might be that Kerrigan's thinking, nobody likes to lay out on the turf, but that would have been one where maybe getting your hands out in front of you and just focusing on pulling that disc in, which is what Fedorenko did, would have been advisable. Alex Thomas has the disc, marked by Holland, finds Trimble, who's been rock steady, and he decides to air one out. The Diesel and Kerrigan underneath it. John Diamikis waiting for the disc to come down, but we've seen that happen a couple of times today, Charlie, with the wind blowing out of the west. Those hucks stall a little bit, and so Kerrigan was able to make the play, but can't fault Trimble for throwing it up there, especially right now with the Thunderbirds' deep game working.
They maybe need to set their stack a little shallower so they get those hucks going up earlier so that the player can run underneath it rather than having it sit up and allowing the defense to make a play.
Looks like we have a strip called on Anthony Kahn over there. And Norbaum's going to pick it up, and it was a nice bid, but I'm sure he'd have called it on himself if that was the way that we did it here, but the referees were right on top of it. Donahue's got it, and now DC will put the disc in. I agree with you about shortening the stack. It would create the effect. Nice inside out, by the way. Now Holland's got the disc. Blake in the middle of the field sends one up to Pryor, who's the key to this offense. Verdella comes and joins him. He shuffles around. Thunderbirds in a bit of a straight up mark, and I think they'll probably switch over and try to force to that far sideline right now, and that's exactly what they do. Blake gets open upfield. Norbaum's got it. Akon forcing Norbaum to the sideline, and that's just where he goes. He gets it back on a little shuffle pass back. A lot of in-close work by the handlers right now, and a vertical stack downfield, looking for a breakout cut. Maxtat throws a high release up, and a beautiful bid, but for naught. From my perspective, and clearly nobody agrees with me because everybody over there is agreeing that it's a goal, it looked like he might have been out of bounds. Maxtat with a little bit of a risky throw, but a nice one.
Yeah, he kept it in on that, tight to that sideline. Always a bit of a risk to put up that high release backhand because of how much float can get underneath those. But
Maxtat is a master with the disc.
Indeed.
And but you know, you see the defensive fire by a guy who doesn't necessarily get a ton of points or touches, Anthony Kahn. And he showed there that he's willing to throw himself out, full extension, a lot of altitude. And even if you don't touch the disc, that's not an easy thing to concentrate through when you see a big body flying in front of you, eclipsing that plastic for a second. So Thunderbirds up by just one, but playing with the kind of intensity that they need to bring against a team that comes in more accomplished and with more to play for in the DC Breeze. DC settling down nicely on that last sequence, and we've got a mistake here. Max Shepard throws one too low for a bidding Owen Watt. Now just about 30 yards away from the goal line, former Thunderbird Marcus Thaw picks it up, sends a little inside out to a diving Reese Bergeron, another inside out to his brother, who says that he was not a pest, a good little brother. Marcus Thaw with it now, and working very hard against Mark Fedorenko is Delrico Johnson. I mean, he is a handful and a half to keep up with, but we've got to call him. Looks like there might have been a pick on the field.
Be 10 yards against DC.
Brian Heim is known for being willing to call picks, and has been since he started in the league. And a lot of players actually appreciate that. Not the guys called for the pick, of course, but I think that that's a call that sometimes doesn't get made frequently enough, and Heim looks for it.
That's definitely the case. There are cities where you go and referee crews that tend not to call picks much at all.
Having lost a few yards and back now near midfield, Marcus Thaw sends it out to Quinn Bergeron. Kenny Ferdella marks him. Swift with the disc in the backfield. And this one floats beyond the reach of the handler. Number 5, Brad Scott, lays out to try to pick it up, and the Thunderbirds go on offense right away. 2 of their stars working, and you can bet this one's going deep. Sent across the field. Max Shepard's got wheels, but does he have enough? Definitely not. And that's one that Van Dusen's going to regret, because in a foot race, it's tough to keep up with Max Shepard. And, you know, I think sometimes when a deep receiver gets a step or two on his guy, especially downfield, throwers have a tendency to pull the trigger when they see that separation, and sometimes they'd be better off if they held onto the disc for 2 or 3 more steps and just allowed the receiver to get some yardage downfield. DC getting the disc back and not necessarily liking what they saw. They ran Delrico Johnson deep. Ethan Beardsley switched off onto him, and they called a timeout. So they'll come in with a little bit of the stall having elapsed. It's 6:30 left in the second period, and Pittsburgh is up 6-5. And they have to like what they're seeing. Pittsburgh having a really excellent week last week out in Milwaukee at College Nationals. Did you get a chance to watch the Pittsburgh women Danger, who made a tremendous run from the 10th seed to the quarterfinals, and of course, and Sabiner, which made another similarly impressive run, got all the way to finals before losing to UNC.
Yeah, both teams exceeding expectations in a big way, and you know, it's hard to say who did a better job in terms of going beyond what they were expected to do. The women's team getting all the way to the semis, where they lost to Colorado in a very good game. Carolyn Normile, superstar. I think she'll be out there in the Supercell team tomorrow.
She will. She'll be out there with Kat Power also. Or sorry, Kat Power is a superhero. I've got to remember Kat's last name, but I'll come up with it. In any event, though, they're going to be.
Kat Pagano, maybe?
There you go. Pagano sounds like she should just change it, shouldn't she?
I
like Kat Power.
It fits.
Well, and she's a power player, and so yeah, there will be a couple of Danger players out there. It's really exciting for me, Charlie. I'll tell you, because my daughter is going to be a freshman at Pitt. She's a Pittsburgh high school player and a rec player, and she's going to have the opportunity to try out and be part of that program, either Danger or High Voltage, and she's so excited. And as her dad, I mean, been dreaming of it forever. Now, a big huck pulled down by the big man Blake, and he shovels it off to Del Rico, and before you know it, the game is tied. So exactly the sort of breakout play, not exactly a clean one, but you have to like your target when you've got Blake going up against Delgado, who's got a lot of heart but not a lot of height.
Yeah, solid. You know, there was some defense down there, but you had two offensive players. It was in stride. That's the kind of huck you want to see going in that direction. And that's a big play to score that way, as the Breeze put one on the board and tie it up at 6.
2 in a row. So it involves a break. And I have to actually correct myself, because Felipe Delgado won't appreciate the fact that he got accused of blowing that coverage when he was on the sideline. But that was Anthony Kahn underneath it. So a couple of quick strikes by DC. And, you know, the Thunderbirds have to know that they're going to be in a fight all the way through, and can't expect that a lead like that is going to hold up. They're going to have to play this all the way out, and they get a chance to strike back now with Kenny Fردella picking up the disc on the home sideline, sending it into the middle to John Mast, and he's looking downfield at a vertical stack. Owen Watt cuts the break, receives the pass, sends one out to Mark Fedorenko, who scoops one off the ground and is quickly double teamed. Looks like he's got Boxley around him and Thaw, and we've got a call downfield, but that was a block pulled down by Joe Richards on a hammer that was really just thrown out of desperation. Let's see what the discussion is all about.
It seems like maybe there's some complaining from Thunderbirds that there was a foul, but I didn't see much here. That looked like an uncatchable play, and now they're going to stop the clock.
To me, too. I mean, Ethan Beardsley is a big guy. So if he leaps up, and it looks like they're going to get what they wanted, and I don't know if that's lobbying the home refs or what, but and I don't know if we're going to get a chance to look at it again, but Beardsley is going to get the disc right on the goal line. Briefly double team, but I guess they figured that Broyles was probably better used with his height against Mast than against Beardsley. And now Mast has the disc in his hands. Broyles goes around to try to stop the around. And he doesn't stop the around, but it doesn't much matter because Joe Richards gets his block after all. Disc in the possession of DC, with Bartenstein holding on to it, waiting for the mark to arrive, does in the form of Della. Max Shepard sags. Now he's going to roll with the thrower. They send it out to number 1, Alexander Fall. Fall looks downfield, and he finds Richards. Richards puts one up in the air. Underneath it is Christian Boxley and Fedorenko, and Boxley comes down with it. The young guy from Georgetown, who carried his team to nationals this year, comes up with a big grab to put his team, DC Breeze, ahead 7-6.
Yeah, Boxley had a huge nationals for Georgetown, and if you haven't, go take a look at his greatest that got them the win over UNC Wilmington at regionals. That was really maybe the signature upset of the college postseason. And he made an incredibly athletic play.
And a universe point greatest.
That's right, on double game point.
Yep.
Puts it up, and his team comes down with it to send them past Wilmington in a massive upset. And that set the table for them to move on to nationals.
That's one of those plays, I think, like Bo jumps over a guy, that could become a sort of immortal
Iconic.
YouTube clip, you know, because not only did and here we've got a pull that will not be iconic, a little bit of a boomerang, and will it come down as a brick too? Yeah. So didn't catch the number of the truck that threw that pull, but I think that's probably for the best. Pat McMullen's going to put it in play. But yeah, I think they'll be watching it for a long time, because not only did he make a tremendous play to get the disc back in on lefty backhand trailing out of bounds, but the first disc was, the first attempt at a catch was muffed, and it was a layout on the deflection. John Buss with the disc. He gets Marcus Thaw to fall down, and Scott Trucks Trimble catches the in cut. He sends one into the middle of the field, and Alex Thomas saves the disc and sends it back to Pat McMullen. That was not the guy who was the intended receiver of that pass. Little high release forehand finds Jack Heffron. He finds Trimble, and the Thunderbirds working it right up the middle right now. Delgado fakes the overhead, wisely throws it back to Buss. Buss sees McMullen. He jumps up, pulls it in on the goal line, and has a number of opportunities that he passes up. And just as Alex Thomas was breaking into the corner, he throws it back, gets it back, still bottled up on this sideline. Might do well to switch the field.
Pittsburgh does much better when they're hitting the open side, and when they're hucking. The break side is much more dangerous, as we see there, and a big collision downfield.
Yeah, unfortunate, because Buss was tracking it. I don't think he saw Trimble coming in. Trimble could see that Buss wasn't in position. He went up, got his hand on it, and it was not easy for me to see where the contact was, but Marcus Thaw doesn't look happy. It might be that he's injured. And we'll see who possession is awarded to. Looks like Brad Scott's walking over toward the disc, but it's still sitting there on the ground, and the officials are going to confer. Donahue, Heim, Gorham, they come to a consensus. And possession will belong to DC, and I think that's as it should be. But
dangerous play to come flying into a pile like that.
It was, and at the same time, I think he recognized that it was the only chance his team had to keep possession right there, but he ended up injuring his own guy who just didn't see him. And when you've got the line of sight, you really have to avoid the collision, because nothing's worth getting hurt out there. DC playing catch on its goal line. Swift with the disc now, laces it out to Richards. He's marked very quickly by Trimble. Another in-cut on the sideline from Bergeron. This one finds his brother, who barely gets a handle on it, and he throws a nice inside out to Delrico Johnson. So a big shift in momentum. DC has just rolled 4 in a row against Pittsburgh, and a lot of what Pittsburgh was doing right, they're still doing, but I think that DC is challenging them more. They're challenging the handlers, and I think they're fronting, making it impossible for Pittsburgh to get off easy in-cuts. At the same time, they haven't had the deep, so the DC defense is definitely adjusted, and it's going to be important for the Thunderbirds to come up with some counter moves that'll work.
Yeah, you can see the smooth backhand into the end zone as DC makes it an 8-6 lead.
We were talking earlier about some of the players not here for the Thunderbirds, and when you listen to the list, Max Thorne, Alex Thorne, Tyler DiGirolamo, the very charismatic Tad Whistle, one of the only AUDL players I'm aware of who had a bobblehead made for him.
Yeah, those are rare. I know Bo Kittredge had one when he played for the San Jose Spiders.
Well, Bo Kittredge and Tad Templeton Walcott, the third whistle. And Mike Pannoni isn't here. Anson Repperman, who will be here tomorrow to watch his sister play for Supercell. Shayna is going to be playing. But Anson now playing for Madison to add insult to injury. Xavier not here. You put all those names together, you run them out on any AUDL line, and you have to like them as a possibility to score. But number of reasons. I think mostly guys realizing that it's hard to play with full commitment to two teams at once, and I think a lot of the Pittsburgh guys wanting to focus on temper their USAU club team this year. But this year's edition of the Thunderbirds, with possession, Ferdella saves swing that seemed to stick on Mass' finger, and then Mass, there's a nifty little cut up the line against Broyles. Strike cut works out, and Fedorenko pulls it in front of Swift. Thunderbirds knocking on the door, but probably don't want to try to score on this side of the field unless they get a little bit more room. Mass sends it out to Van Dusen. Van Dusen throws an inside out that Verdella pulls in. That one was a tough one. Reached up, got it over his head, and he throws a high release. There's going to be a contest in the back of the end zone and a layout, and who comes up with it? Looks to me like Ethan Beardsley, the Birdman. Or is that Owen Watt?
Great catch.
That was definitely Beardsley. And it went past its intended receiver. And he just makes an alert play and a really gutsy one. Look at this layout.
The backhand pops too high and a double layout, and just a great catch by Beardsley. That's you add a little bit to your wins above replacement with that catch.
No kidding. And as I said, he was a goal-scoring machine. He's a very cautious player, not a guy. I think in all the years I've been watching, and I've seen him make, and it was this year, one downfield throw. And I actually went and asked him about it afterwards, and he said, yeah, I really had to think about it, but it was there, so he did it. But I didn't get the sense he was eager to do it again. So the perfect thing for him is to catch it in the end zone. That's a role that's often played, by the way, by Wiley veteran David Vatz, the human backwards hat, number 4, but he can't play today, woke up with back pain, and I hate to be the one to tell him. He's 32 now, and that happens from time to time. Hopefully they'll get him back.
Yeah, he's a big part of keeping their offense flowing.
He is, because he knows these receivers so well, and he finds the spaces that they can throw to that the defense doesn't necessarily think to cover. Speaking of guys who make the offense go, Pryor in the middle of this mix, and now the disc in the hands of Blake. Blake sends it back to Pryor.
A little bit more confident work here from DC against this containment zone, moving the disc with shorter passes, taking advantage of some yardage gain on the edges.
Wouldn't surprise me if Coach Stanley just said to, now Kerrigan has the disc to gain a little bit of yards, said to Max that, hey, I know you can yank that sharp bender over the top of the zone. Just don't.
That's right. It's not getting them much right now because he's turning it over more than he's completing.
But now he's just a cog in a wheel that is rolling towards the goal line. And Thunderbirds stay in that zone. And it's popped over the top and finds Kerrigan. So DC extends its lead to 2. And we're down into the waning moments of this first half. 1:33 remaining. And the Thunderbirds will send their offensive team out there hopefully to score and bring it at least to within 1, or maybe end the second quarter the way they did the first if they can get possession back.
This is the best offense we've seen from DC against that zone. And then, you still get a little flair from Maxstad on the high pass into the end zone.
He seems to like it today. And, it's a fun pass to throw when you're throwing downwind, because you tend to get to be able to throw it into your spot and then have it drop into the hands of your intended receiver. Whereas when you're going upwind, and we saw it a little bit over here, though he completed it, it tends to pop up more. Looking down on the sideline, you'll see number 77 wearing blue shorts and a knee brace for the Thunderbirds. It's Mo Jada. Mo is a standout at Michigan State and a Pittsburgh player here. Fast as lightning, and a guy who they were counting on to add another dimension to their game and to really make progress this year. And sadly, very early on in the season, he injured himself, blew out his ACL and his MCL, had successful surgery, and they're hoping that he'll come back full strength. But it's just one of those misfortunes that has afflicted the team this year and led to such a different result than what they've been used to in their first 3 years. Thunderbirds fans got spoiled, honestly. Came out and were in the playoffs and made the semis in this division right away. John Mast had a deep look right off, but thought better of it. Hits Watt on the way in. Watt finds Fedorenko. Fedorenko quickly joined by Brad Scott. Sends it out into space. Mast has to track it down, gets a little bouncy in the middle of the field. Throws a couple of fakes, and he's got Van Dusen. Nifty break, and it turns, so Van Dusen in the power position, looks upfield, doesn't see what he likes. Watt working in front of him.
DC is doing a better job of containing on that open side, not giving them as many free shots and forcing them to do that, which is look to the break side where they've turned the disc over a lot of times tonight.
It's true. It's nice when you can throw the disc to intersect with your guy coming in, as opposed to having to throw a big wide flare like that on a windy evening and hope that things work out. The margin for error gets smaller, and Pittsburgh's making those errors. DC getting the disc back with under a minute left and working to extend their lead to 3. That would be a big difference. The Thunderbirds can hold here, let alone get a break and maybe score the last point. It would be a very different feeling going into halftime.
You can see David Vatz there on the sideline talking to the team, but he's in street shoes tonight, not in cleats.
He threatened to come up here and harass us. I told him I didn't know if we had a microphone for him, but Vatz doesn't usually need a mic to make himself heard. One of the more litigious players, I think, in the AUDL that I've seen. Always up for a good argument. And he's reminds me of another Pittsburgh athletic icon, and that's Hines Ward. Little undersized, good finding spaces in the field, and a guy who you like to have on your team,
and
you don't like to play against him. You don't like him, but definitely the Thunderbirds could use him tonight. Little look ahead at the schedules for both of these teams. Take a look quick at the Thunderbirds first. They've got that mixed game, these two teams tomorrow, out at Founders Field at noon, and then on the 9th, the Thunderbirds will go for another cross-conference challenge against the Philly Phoenix at 6:30 in Philadelphia. They'll play Madison back here on the 16th at 6 o'clock. Join them for a game at Minnesota at 6 Central, 7 Eastern time. And then they'll finish up, that's on the 23rd. On the 30th and then on the 14th of July, they've got games first at Detroit and then against Detroit. Disc is in play. Norbaum's got it, being marked by Mack. Alex Thomas shuts down the in-cut, so it's an inside-out to Pryor. About 40 seconds left. Blake picks one up off his shoe tops, marked by Trimble. He cuts off the up-the-liner, and so he throws it back into the middle to Norbaum. And he throws a low one, but it floats right into the hands of Khalifa. He's looking up at the scoreboard clock. They're facing it, and they've got 25 seconds left. Plenty of time here to make something happen. Kerrigan running deep against Alex Thomas. A lot of handler cuts here. That stall goes whether there's a mark on you or not. Holland gets a look at his target in the end zone, Delrico Johnson, and he throws a nice counter there. Backhand into space, and with 10 seconds left, DC seizes the lead, but leaves the Thunderbirds enough time for one of those AUDL-only specials. And that is time running out in the quarter, and I think we're probably going to see some tall guys on the field for the Thunderbirds and for DC.
Look at the vision on the throw. Pump fakes the forehand, back to the backhand side, perfectly weighted out into space for Delrico Johnson. And DC puts the break on the board, and you're right, they did leave 10 seconds, but that's a big score coming off of a possession where Pittsburgh was almost down into the red zone. They take the timeout, put the offense on the field, get the break, and extend the lead to 3.
Breaks are so big in this game, and even more so because, as you mentioned, this field is simply enormous. It's not the kind of field that we grow up playing on. It's 10 yards longer and it's 13 yards wider. And I remember talking to a number of players. I remember Tad Whistle told me, you know, when you've got to run 35 yards to cut off an around throw on a handler, you know what fatigue is. If you had to play a tournament under these conditions, I think you'd need a roster of 35 guys. These guys run so hard in these situations. And so when a defense can steal a break and convert it, it's a very big advantage. And it was actually key to DC's win against Raleigh. They started out with a 5-0 lead, and I think they got off 8 breaks in that game. And so DC is a resourceful team. You know, when I was talking to their coach, Darryl Stanley, he said, we got a huge win last week. We're in a dogfight for 2nd or 3rd in our division. We got a huge win against New York, and I wasn't there. They knew from the start that their coach wasn't going to be able to be there. He said they made all the adjustments on their own, and they pulled out a 1-point win on their own against a divisional rival. It says a lot about a team's resourcefulness and cohesiveness when they're able to do that.
You know, they now have 2 big recent wins. You know, they beat New York last week, but they also got the win at home against Raleigh, a game that nobody had them winning. And that has put them in a position where they're back in the playoff hunt. You know, going into those games, it looked like they were down and out. They had lost in New York in a close game on the road in New York, and everybody had kind of written their obituary before that Raleigh game, and then they win that, and they beat New York, and all of a sudden they're back in the mix. Winning here tonight, key.
We've got about 9 seconds left. Mass sends one deep, but it's not going to be deep enough. Richard gets up on it, and with 3 seconds left, Del Rico, no, I'm sorry, that is Boxley picks it up, and he stands up, and looming over him is the Birdman. And so Ethan Beardsley gets a foul called on him, and if they're smart, they're going to bring Beardsley in with Watt to set up a tent around this guy.
The stadium clock's showing now 3 seconds, so they've reset it to 3. And now they'll roll it, so he'll have to get a throw off immediately. No call.
Which is surprising to me, because it looked to me like Marcus Stahl was getting beat up in a phone booth there by those two big guys.
Sometimes you don't get those calls right at the end of a quarter or a half situation.
It's kind of like a hospital pass, you know. We're not going to give you the benefit of a call, and it's one of those things where, you know, and I'm a fan of the hybrid observer system and self-refereeing, but it's one of those things where that could have turned into a 5-minute exchange on the field.
And instead, we just go to halftime, which was probably the right outcome anyway.
And here we are with the result that we probably would have had, and not one that would have surprised somebody before the game. DC up 10-7, but the nature of the game so far, the closeness of it, and the period of time in the sort of middle of the end of the first and the beginning of the second quarter, where Pittsburgh not only held their own but looked, as you said, better, would be a surprise. And so I would not look at this and say, oh wow, Pittsburgh's down 3, they're probably going to play catch up, and maybe the margin's going to be 6. Right now, I don't think we know what's going to happen. It depends on which two teams come out.
Some big adjustments to be made at halftime. We'll talk about those in a moment. For now, we're going to let you take a look at some highlights as we take a little breather here at halftime. So we've got the top 10 plays from Week 9 in the AUDL. Enjoy.
This works. Call it off. Goodness gracious! Hunter Taylor makes the catch. And the Raleigh Flyers are soaring tonight in Wisconsin.
That's what that radical zone can do. Bait throwers into thinking there's more space than there really is, and
swings it, try-wise, knifes it to the end zone, and going up over the pack, Scott Riggles at the buzzer. Good spirit from both sides with the Radicals with no time on the clock.
So he's just like, all right, I'm just going to catch this and really just make sure we get the disc.
Yep, there's the other side. It's Carpenter. He's going to get it. He goes down and he has an amazing catch by Carpenter.
Nethercutt to Mitchell. Wow. As good as it gets from Jonathan Nethercutt.
Terrence Mitchell was running so fast, he was catching bugs in his eye. Like a car speeding down the highway at 60 miles an hour. Smashing him on the windshield.
Welcome back to Pittsburgh, where the DC Breeze lead the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds 10-7. And it's been an interesting back and forth first half, Matt. What have you noticed so far? I've got some thoughts here in just a second.
Well, one of the things I noticed was that Pittsburgh, in the middle of the game, managed to stretch the field out and make DC play defense in both directions. Sam Van Dusen particularly was able to air the disc out, find receivers downfield, and Pittsburgh was able to strike quickly, and that put DC in a tough position. First of all, they were running that offensive team off the field. They were able to get the defensive team back on quickly, but it also meant that they eventually had to drop back and try to stop that and play defense against the in-cuts too. Eventually, they settled in, and they've made it a lot harder on the Thunderbirds, but there was a period of time where they opened up the field. If they can do that again, I think that they might have success.
I think one thing we noticed from DC that they did well is that early in the game, or I should say sort of late in the first quarter, we saw them start to give up some hucks to Pittsburgh. Sam Van Dusen hitting a couple deep and getting a couple breaks on the board. And then they started to shut that down. They took away the deeps. They took away the open side space and made that a lot more difficult for the Thunderbirds, forcing them to work back to the break side. And that's where we've seen the Thunderbirds struggle. And I think you see that they don't necessarily have the same kind of dynamic handlers that they had a year ago. And that's made it harder for them to get that motion back to the other side of the field where they can put those scores in from that side.
And that's been what's plagued them all year long. We talked about it earlier in the broadcast, where the Thunderbirds have athleticism. They've got players who can make plays, but they can't make them as consistently as maybe a team like DC or like they've been able to do in the past. And so I think that it's probably to DC's advantage to try to make the Thunderbirds play precisely, to keep the points long, and to force them to execute again and again and again, because the odds are, and they have been this season, that there's going to be a break at some point. And then DC did a better job as we got into the second quarter of taking advantage of those breaks. They were able to, rather than turn the disc back over or make an impulsive play, keep a handle on it, play smart, and as a consequence, they were able to reopen a lead. But for a while, the Thunderbirds showed that they had a formula that worked, and if they can get back to it, if DC will let them, then we could have ourselves a real contest.
Agreed. I think we talked about what started to happen to Pittsburgh on offense, and I think if the coaching staff talks about those adjustments, they can absolutely get their O-line rolling again. And for their defensive line, we saw them get turnovers, and we saw them get breaks, but a lot of times for them to get those breaks, they had to call that timeout. We saw them put the O on the field, and They've got turns, particularly using the containment zone that they were using early in the game. Although we saw that effectiveness of that zone start to wane towards the end of the second quarter once DC started to get more patient, and we saw Maxstat not trying to do too much in the backfield for the Breeze.
It might be wise for them at this point to run that zone out there and then maybe try to melt into a man defense. Anything to throw DC off a little bit. Sometimes when you get into a rhythm of working among the handlers against a zone like that, it can take you a few seconds to realize that now you're suddenly matched up man-to-man. And some of the throws that have been there uncontested aren't there anymore. And in the AUDL, with the stall at 7 seconds, being counted by somebody else, not out loud, you can sometimes steal a stall or a desperation throw. So zone to man, if they feel comfortable doing it, might be a way that they can steal one or two. And really, when you're within 3, 1 or 2 might be all you need.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, being down 3 is something that I think the Thunderbirds would be glad to take going into the second half, playing at home. And, obviously it probably feels a little more frustrating considering that they were up at the end of the first quarter and they had a chance to maybe stay there or stay even, and they gave up that big run of breaks to DC in the middle of the second quarter. But you make the changes, you have that chance to fight back. And, despite the fact that Pittsburgh may not have a chance at the playoffs this year, this would still be a signature win, and you want to get a win over a team like DC that went to the finals in the East last year where they lost to Toronto, and that looks like they could get back to the playoffs this year, regardless of whether or not you have a chance to go to the playoffs.
Absolutely. You don't want to be, if you're the Thunderbirds at the end of the season, 3-11 with your only 3 wins coming against the Detroit Mechanix. And in fact, their only win so far this year is a 1-point win here in the opener against the Mechanix. But they are up against, despite the fact that they had periods during the beginning of the game where they were dominant, the scoreboard does tell the story. And that story is that since they opened up a 6-4 lead, DC has been on a 6-1 run. And so if you're the Breeze, maybe you go into the locker room and say, okay, we got off the bus. Our legs were a little bit stiff. Maybe we underestimated these guys because we know their record. We know that they're in a down year. And we let ourselves get rattled early on. We found our feet. We're rolling now. And at this point, I think if you're DC, you can play with a lot of confidence. So while the Thunderbirds have reason to be hopeful and optimistic, and they certainly have adjustments they can make, the fact of the matter is that they need to reverse the trend of the last half of this first half, because if they don't, it won't be close. DC has dominated on the scoreboard.
And I think the start of this third quarter is going to be crucial for really for both teams, but particularly for Pittsburgh, facing that 3-point deficit. They got to come out strong to start the second half. Getting a couple back right away can build some belief in your sidelines, get the crowd into it, and give them a chance to start to make a push back and try to tie it up.
And in fact, they're going to have to get a break in order to do that. You see Scott Trucks Trimble out there, and he's out there with the D1 team. Pat McMahon, who is a speedy D-team handler, is out there with him. And then you see some of the flyers for the Thunderbirds. John Diesel D'Amicus and Alex Thomas is out there. We've already seen Anthony Kahn show that he's willing to lay his body out there multiple times on the point. So that's the team that's going to look to come out and disrupt the DC offense, which, as you pointed out, has been working more and more like clockwork. One of the guys who's helped to key that has been Zach Norbaum, number 10, who stands down there, and he was not in the lineup at the beginning of the game. And then they started running them out there, and he's out there now with Kerrigan and Pryor, who of course is a mainstay, and Blake. We also see Maxstat. And Norbaum has been a steadying influence. He's played in the middle of that handler lineup or fed Pryor and has helped to set things to right.
Zach Norbaum just won the Donovan Award, the player voted award in the Division III college. And I was happy to have a chance to hand him the award.
Oh, that's wonderful.
At the Division III College Championships in Rockford. And so getting honored by his peers in the division as the best player this season in Division III.
That makes a big difference when you get an award and it comes from your peers. And, you know, as somebody who was there and watched that competition, Division III is no joke. There is some really good ultimate being played, and some players at some of the smaller schools who are going to come into the club ranks and the pro ranks and make a big difference, and Zach's already doing that. So a nice award for him. Congratulations to him. And we see a foul there. Two big guys getting to know each other, as Bill Russell used to say. Blake and Trucks Trimble. Blake looks to the break. Instead throws it back to Norbaum and then shoots across. Everybody stays on who he's covering. Pryor with the disc, going to the far sideline, away from us right now. Blake up the line. Trimble gets suckered a little bit on that cut. He's got a big end zone to look at. Norbaum does a strike cut. Got a vertical stack in front of him. Little shuffle pass to a Pryor circling behind, and then he laces one. Sharp pass to Khalifa on the goal line, middle of the field, and it's 11-7. DC with a hold.
A good opening hold for DC to start the second half. And that's what you want to do. No drama. Just go out there, march it down, march it in. And they had a couple of dangerous reset plays, but you see this nice move. Once you're covered up in the backfield, coming back up the field to get open, and then a little forehand into the end zone gets them the score. And they're now with their, I believe, their largest lead of the game at 4 points.
Yep. Patient, heady play by the handlers for the DC Breeze. And a nice cut around the back of the thrower by Pryor up the line, and that can be a real tightrope cut because you've got to be careful not to take yourself out of bounds, and you also have to be careful not to pick your defender off against the thrower, and he did both of those things in a nifty little pass. We see the Thunderbirds defensive team right now talking on the sidelines, trying to figure out how they're going to steal now at least a couple of breaks, because there's no other way to get back into this game. They're not going to do it on offense. Offense, though, does have to hold, and Jonathan Mast gets the pass from Kenny Fridella, which he sends over to Max Shepard to see if they can do just that. A really close play, and very coolly, Van Dusen reaches back, gets it, sends it out to Beardsley. He'll look to make a safe throw. Jonathan Mast working in front of him. Sends one into the middle, and it turns into an adventure that Mast completes with a left-handed layout grab, but we've talked about that. Those plays that should be routine, and it doesn't seem to be much routine for this offense right now. Kenny Fridella makes a nice play, taking it off the defender's leg practically. That was a little too far out in front of him. And Max Shepard with a big one across the field. Can Beardsley catch up to it? He can't. Falls out of bounds. A little bit too much mustard on it from Shepard. And that's the kind of play that DC didn't make the last time they had it down on the goal line. They were patient. And Max Shepard loves to make things happen with his spectacular throws and his athleticism, but probably too much there.
We've seen a few times this game, throws just maybe 2 degrees off, 5 miles per hour too hard, and it's been those little differences that have led to a lot of dangerous plays for Pittsburgh where they have to lay out and try to make a possession-saving catch, or in the case of what we just saw, a turnover.
This is a nice mark by Fedorenko, who pushes the throw backwards, and then we've got one aired out by Bartenstein, and doesn't look like it's going to find anybody. Maybe he was throwing it to Brian Heim, the referee, who was wide open. But I'm not sure. Maybe his receiver, who I think might have been Walden, might have cut off that cut. And he ended up throwing it to nobody.
Yeah, I think the tailwind may have hurt him there as well.
Sure. It's tough throwing upwind. All throwers have to learn to throw upwind, and that does separate great throwers from less competent ones. But throwing downwind is an art, too, especially deep. Van Dusen throwing upwind, and he throws one that's going to blade a little bit. And I don't think there's a receiver on the Thunderbirds who was going to be able to track that one down, but Owen Watt was definitely not going to. He is leading the team in goals, but he is not fast enough to catch up with that one, which had a little bit too much blade on it. And now DC takes over again. The offensive team for the Thunderbirds playing a lot of defense right now. Tracking it down over there is Fall. Fall launches a backhand out into space. And unable to track it down is Brad Scott. So the rookie making a bit of an impulsive throw, but when you've got a 4-goal lead, maybe you can do that a little bit.
And the cutters have been open. It's just been overthrows that really have hurt both teams on this point.
you can see Pittsburgh having to make a lot of close catches. And I think here comes another one if it's made, and it won't be. Broyles tracks it down, goes over the head of Watt. He lays out in front of the thrower. And we see Pat Hammonds very upset right now with the officials, pleading his case. I think he might be arguing for a travel. I certainly didn't see a foul. Or maybe he thought that his receiver was knocked down as that disc went over his head. But to me, that pass was uncatchable.
You see the turnover, throw going too high, easily intercepted, and then the backhand into the end zone for the easy DC break as they go up by 5.
We have up here with us visiting David Vatz. I don't have a microphone for Dave Vatz, but that back woke up, wasn't feeling too good. He's shaking his head. So it's got to be frustrating for him not to be able to be out on the field right now and finding those open spaces as he usually does. And I'm sure that Pat Hammonds wishes that he had his legal services down there when he went to plead that case with referee Neil Donahue. He did not. And here comes a pull. It's going to fall a little short. You can see the effect of the wind, definitely going into the wind. So the Thunderbirds coming downwind now. And this put in play by Pat Mack. Sam Van Dusen set up against a fronting mark by Swift and beautifully defended. Didn't really have many options, and we sent a high release up to Fridella, but his first choice was shut down. He's not shut down now. Sam Van Dusen laces one up the line, and it's just a little bit too far for Scott Trimble, and maybe all of that hard work is starting to show in the legs of the Thunderbirds. Maybe the throw's getting a little bit weaker, and as you said, off by a few degrees, and the receivers who had been making spectacular catches not quite able to pull those things in. Bergeron floats it out to Thaw. Thaw's got Swift over on the far side, who played defense so ably against Sam Van Dusen in that handler position. He shoots one into the middle. Tracking it down is Reese Bergeron, joined by Sam Van Dusen, then runs away from him, gets it back from his brother. In the power position, has to slow down and is double teamed. Throws a scuba over the top. Thaw unaccompanied pulls that down. And then we got to throw into the end zone. This one going up for Delrico Johnson, and he is going to pull it in for a goal. That one aired out to him by Brad Scott. Johnson pulls it down, and things are getting a little out of hand for the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds as DC opens up a 6-goal lead. We got 6:39 remaining in the third period, and the Thunderbirds walking off the field looking for answers and looking a little dejected at this point.
That makes it a 3-0 run. See the backhand putting it up for Johnson, knows he's going to come down with it. And that makes it a 3 scores in a row to start the second half for DC. And we talked about it at halftime. Pittsburgh needs to come out and start well. Doesn't happen. Now facing a big deficit. It's going to be hard to get back against this DC team that's looking a lot stronger on their feet right now. You're seeing them cut and run harder than Pittsburgh.
Well, when I talked to Darryl Stanley before the game about what this game means for his team, in addition to, of course, as you said, in a 3-way dogfight for a playoff spot with Montreal and New York, every game counts. But he talked about being able to move guys into unaccustomed positions and give them an opportunity to shine and pick up some experience. And I said, well, you know, to make a playoff run, you need a deep bench. And he said, oh, that we have. And I think you're seeing the effect of that now. Van Dusen has Beardsley open deep, but he's got a defender with him. He lays out, and does he come down with it? He doesn't. Cannot blame Van Dusen for throwing that one, and he had to put it out in front of him because he had Joe Richards running right with him, and Beardsley had an opportunity. It's a catch he'll make sometimes, but it's always a tough one, and he didn't come up with it there. Broyles comes up with the disc. He's being marked by Van Dusen, and once again, the offensive team put in the unfortunate position of having to play defense. Boxley has it. Marked by Fedorenko, throws a nifty inside-out backhand up to Walden, who jacks one out into space, and Richards and DC is now leaving the Thunderbirds in their wake.
Crushing offense from DC. Pittsburgh just behind the whole time. And Boxley looked off a huck, hits this backhand inside that opens up a power position, doesn't even throw the forehand, throws the inside-out backhand, drops it in with some touch. Beautiful stuff from the breeze.
And he was able to do that, to throw that backhand because he was so nicely set up by Boxley's inside out, which hit him right in the breadbasket inside, and he was able then to make the turn downfield, and his mark was not fully in position, and was able to yank that backhand kind of inside and float it out very nicely for his receiver. It's easier to put touch on those backhand throws when you're going downwind, and it certainly sat out there nicely for him. Meanwhile, the stuff that was working for the Thunderbirds isn't working at this point.
Upwind pulls a real challenge. It's a good job just to get it down to the 30-yard line.
Yep, and to give your defense time to set up, which is what they do. They come downfield. Max Shepard with the disc on the run. As soon as he throws it, Delgado with the disc in his hands looking for help, and really have to admire the defense of Swift. He made that difficult. Did force Fridella up the line, and then a nice mark by Scott made the less experienced thrower, Delgado, throw it away. This one, it is not easy to overthrow Delrico Johnson, but
he would have made Sports Center if he'd made that play.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
His handlers keep asking him to do a little bit more every point, and that one just too much to ask.
Yep, dropped down very quickly, but he certainly is a threat, and he's not a guy that you want to cover in and give him the deep. Meanwhile, an errant scoober from Pat Mack over the top to Fridella, just beyond his grasp, and Thaw will pick it up. DC with the chance to open up an 8-goal lead. And what looked like a promising opportunity to steal a game for the Thunderbirds is slipping away. Bergeron with the disc on the goal line. And Mom and Dad Bergeron are going to be happy about that one. That one was brother to brother, big brother to little brother, and you get the big shoulder bump there. I'm sure they did that a lot in their childhood, sometimes in anger, sometimes in celebration. And they're celebrating now a 15-7 lead with 4:40 left. Let's take a look ahead for DC and see what they have, because as you mentioned several times, they are in a playoff race. They have tomorrow the challenge match against the Supercell team from Pittsburgh. Those are mixed teams that will be going out at noon, and I hope you'll look in on our feed. You can log in through the Thunderbirds Facebook page, and you'll see the link there. On June the 9th, they'll play the Rush at home. And then following that, they're going to have a weekend, a week off, and then a weekend where they're going to play the Rush away, and then in Ottawa. So a Canada tour for them. Big games there. As you said, Toronto running away with the division, but a big game against Ottawa, who beat them earlier.
Yeah, you almost wonder if you sit some starters in that away Rush game, looking ahead to that Ottawa game and wanting to make sure that you win it, because you don't need to beat the Rush at home, but you definitely need to beat Ottawa on the road. So that's going to be a key match and a key, 2-game road trip to watch.
And we have a little exchange there. Not going to make the highlight reel for the AUDL, but twin turnovers, and the less said the better. But I agree with you that you have to be strategic, and these are not huge rosters, but you do have some choice about who you play, and so that would be an opportunity maybe for them to play some of their less used players on Saturday, and then come out against Ottawa and try to get an all-important win.
And at this
Here,
point,
Max Shepard does have a man deep, and it's Sam Van Duzen. Usually that is the other way. Sam Van Duzen is the thrower. He catches it on the goal line. It popped up, and he sends one up to Fridella, who's been laying out all over the place to save some errant throws, and a little bit of an adventure even on that one. Shepard had a wide-open Van Duzen deep, sends it there, and it sails along as you would expect it to until it reaches that open end zone. And we talked earlier about how all four corners of this stadium let the wind in, popped it up. Van Duzen had to wait, couldn't milk it into the end zone, and then he threw one up to Fridella. But a much needed score and just a hold for the Thunderbirds. It's 15-8 favor of DC. So, look, there's time left.
And there's the catch by Van Duzen, and just a little flip into the end zone. And finally, the Thunderbirds get on the board here in the third quarter.
And with 3:46 left, you got to hope that the Thunderbirds have one more run left in them to maybe make this interesting. But they have dug themselves a hole. We said at the outset that the Thunderbirds have tended to do that at the beginning of games this season, but they decided to do it to start the second half. Not a change, I think, that anybody's particularly happy with. We're in that containment zone again. Kincaid, May, Ciccione and Heffron in the wall. In the backfield, we've got McMahon, Fedorenko, and Delgado. Working against it, Maxted has the disc. Norbaum catches it on a little flip from him. He's got Blake, and they are running up the left side of that zone. Double team now on the thrower, and it looks like they're going to get a few more yards. We've got a contact foul signaled. And they'll step it off and be probably right on the goal line. This is not a middle of the field foul, but they are right on the doorstep. Norbon behind. Khalifa working hard against Heffron, and he finds an open space. That's a very difficult island for a defender to be on, especially against a guy as small and quick as Khalifa. And Heffron's a quick guy, but he's a rangy guy and was unable to defend that one.
Yeah, they try the zone again, and DC has figured it out.
Yep.
They have not had a problem going against it the last 2 or 3 times they've seen it, and this is just easy offense into the end zone.
Well, they've got 4 defenders arrayed in front of them, and I think what they've done is they've got their 3 handlers back there, but they always make sure that they have a cutter cycling back to be a 4th handler. And they're just finding little spaces in the zone until they can break out. And sometimes by pulling that cutter back into the backfield, not only do you open up a lot of easy passes for your handlers, but you clear space downfield. You confuse that zone as to who they have to match up against or what passes they have to defend, and they've found the spaces and have been off and running. So 16-8, they've doubled the Pittsburgh score. 2:45 remaining as the sun goes down, and that's undoubtedly a factor. You can see it shining in the eyes of the guys standing with their backs to the east end zone. And boy, Kenny Fردella barely hangs onto the pole. Kind of ice cream cones it, and kind of sneaks a smile back at Brian Heim, the referee, to say, I got it, I got it. And now John Mass got it, sends it out to Mark Fedorenko. He climbs the ladder to pull that down. Looks, sees Owen Watt going deep, but thinks the better of it and sends one up to Ethan Beardsley. He looks to do a pop out to Mast, who has to come back and get it. And he catches a bender, quickly joined by Lou. Finds Van Duzen, and he's got a receiver deep, and you know he's going to let it go. It's going to be a race to the disc. Marcus Thon, Ethan Beardsley, and Beardsley wins that race. And the Thunderbirds do what they have to do. They score in less than 30 seconds, because if they're going to get back into this game, they not only have to score a lot, they have to do it quick.
Indeed. And it's another great throw from Van Dusen. See him get it in power position, doesn't hesitate, puts it up, drops it in. Beautiful.
Pat Hammond said that one of the things they were hoping to do was to get Van Dusen, who often comes back and handles for the Thunderbirds, to cut downfield. And it has paid dividends today, not as consistently as they would have liked, but when Van Dusen has been able to get that disc on an in-cut and then turn around, and he's had receivers going deep, and the Thunderbirds are timing their deep cuts better than they were in the second quarter. It's just that the throws have not been dimes. They've been about 8-cent throws, just off by a couple.
Coming out of the halftime break, just too many mistakes, and DC much more efficient than they were in the first half, putting them into the end zone, getting breaks. And it's a big deficit here. But even though Pittsburgh's offense has stepped up, now they're going to need their defense to do a lot.
And you're going to see them in their man defense. This is D1 out on the field right now. And you see working very hard against Kerrigan is Diamichis. Kerrigan quickly joined by Robarge. This one sent to Blake, and we're just not seeing DC make the same physical errors that they made. Throws that pop up, throws that are short, ones that blade too much. And you see each of these throws on the money. Holland gets it right in the belly, sends it up to Maxstat. He pops one up, and then a little bumping. And Diamichis comes through the crowd. You see that Alex Thomas set up a position behind the receiver and looked like he had the better position. The wind just pushed it over his head, and Diamichis alertly runs through. But in that pile of players, it looks like we've got Kerrigan shaken up.
Let's take another look. Some jostling for position. Everybody goes up and misses it, and then it looks like a clean block on the follow. And I think there is some discussion about who should get the disc here. There may have been some conversation about whether there was a foul, and the players talking to each other rather than talking to the referees, so perhaps trying to invoke an integrity rule.
That's happened quite a bit in the AUDL, and for people not familiar with the system of refereeing, it's part of the spirit of the game, the spirit of self-officiation that all of these players were trained with. In the AUDL, you can reverse an official's call if that goes against your team. so you can, if you believe that the official has made an error in your favor, you can correct it. And there are times when you see the players really just sort of take over the game. And we had a particularly noteworthy example a couple of years ago in the playoffs here when, and we've got a huck here, it's a low line drive. Anthony Kahn may be able to catch up with it, but going in that downwind direction, it just drops too quickly. But in a playoff game where a lot was at stake and the Radicals were playing in Madison against the Thunderbirds, there were 4 integrity rule invocations, 2 by each team. And I think for those people who worried a lot and continue to worry that having referees would turn the AUDL into a league where dirty play became the standard, I think that spirit of the game was held up pretty well. And whatever you think of the officiating system, the players have played generally with integrity.
Yeah, and there's been plenty of moments where we've seen players making those integrity rulings. And I think the question, of course, is that because they come from a system where they're used to playing with self-officiation? Could it change over time? And I think that's where you have people wondering about whether there's a possibility that it could eventually erode some of the norms that kind of govern ultimate now.
I think it's a legitimate concern, but I also think that we haven't seen a huge migration. Looks like we have a timeout on the field right now. We haven't seen a huge migration of players up. No, there was a call and probably a pick call because we've got 10-yard walk-off. A huge migration out of the club and college game into exclusively the AUDL. And I think most players are still getting their training in that self-officiating system. But there's a lot of change. Oh, we've got an open receiver right now, and what we get is rather than trying to throw that forehand up the line, get a blade to the backhand side, and unfortunately Khalifa could not turn around and catch up with it, and the Thunderbirds have a shot here.
Well, there's zeros on the game clock. And
glad you were watching the clock. I wasn't. It looks like the Thunderbirds weren't either.
But
now we
like
got 3.
Add 3 seconds to the clock. And it's very similar to the end of the first half. But is there enough time for a score?
Well, here's the thing. The clock didn't start on the block. And I think that probably that should have been thrown with 1s or 0s on it. And
well, our clock started at 3 seconds, which is what they put on the game clock. But then the clock stopped and didn't resume on the play from DC, and so now the referees are going to have to decide what to do.
Right,
which is probably going to be a do-over because I don't know what else you could possibly do in this situation.
Right, I saw the block by Pryor, and I expected to see the clock rolling as he went to pick up the disc and throw it, and instead I just saw 3. And then they restarted the clock as he let go of the disc. But to me, you're probably right. The only fair, unless we can coordinate with the referees on the field in our video feed and see when it should have started, I think the only way to do it is to give the disc back to DC, but that's certainly a good block.
So it's going to come back, it looks like. I mean, the coaches are still, you see them down there on the bottom of the field discussing the situation.
Yeah, and I think that that's the case that Pat Hammonds is making, saying that, look, you know, they definitely had, and I think he's saying that they definitely had time elapse after they made that block. We'll see what official ruling is now, and it looks like they're saying that the quarter is over.
It looks like he's indicating 3 seconds to go back on the clock. I'm not clear what's going on.
Well, what I see is players walking off the field.
I see the same.
And I see 0s on the clock. So I think that the judgment was that once Sam Van Duzen launched that throw and Pryor blocked it, that the clock should have been running, and that would have.
They shouldn't have had a chance to then put it in the end zone.
That he didn't pick it up quickly enough. He picked it up, he looked, he waited, and by then 3 seconds should have elapsed. And I think that if this game were as close as it were at the end of the second quarter, we might have had a more vocal argument from the DC Breeze. But given that they are leading by 7 and dominating the game, it seems like they were happy enough to just move on to the fourth quarter. And speaking of between quarter breaks, while we're looking at the huddles, there's an exciting moment going on here at Art Rooney Stadium. Always a big deal, and that is the Hucket Bucket Challenge. So a lot of minis are about to fly out. You get something if you land it in the hoops, but the idea is to get it in the bucket, and it's worth $400. That's why I mention it, because You know, you think about how many AUDL tickets you could buy with $400. That is 50 tickets. And here comes the avalanche of minis. None of them
not even coming close.
Even close. This must be harder than it looks. They're starting to zero in. I think that the smart money waits and judges the wind.
Watch the wind.
Right.
A few hyzers coming through.
Yep. You
see the bucket.
Oh, man. One looks like a little angle of whoa, that one looked like it had a shot, but it's hard to judge, like a foul ball at a baseball game. The Hucket Bucket doesn't look scared. Somebody hit it.
Plastic, but nobody getting enough air underneath it to land it towards the top.
You know, I've always been surprised that they didn't ban this game when my brother-in-law won one week and then his son, my nephew, won the next.
And is it always $400 or?
No. I mean, I think that it's like the Powerball. You know, the money goes up with each week that nobody wins it.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's Bill Holman down there with the bandana and the microphone and the blazer, and he's been the hype guy for the Thunderbirds since they started their season. You know, their first season 4 years ago over at Couple Stadium, and always makes it fun, makes it worth it for folks to come down, and seems to have an endless array of ridiculous halftime games. My favorite is when there's a guy in a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex costume between two throwers who try to hit him. They get a point if they hit the dinosaur, and the dinosaur gets a point if he catches it with his tiny little hands.
Oh, that's great.
And you know, you're never quite sure what's going to happen when Bill Holman gets out on the field. So worth it to come down. And if you're watching at home in the Pittsburgh area, then you should probably think about maybe coming down here and seeing the game in person. It's an inexpensive ticket, and will make it worth your while. And if you're visiting from out of town, you're going to be in town in Pittsburgh. Maybe you're watching from D.C., watching your D.C. Breeze, and you're going to make a trip up I-70 and down the Turnpike. Maybe you want to time it for one of these games when the Thunderbirds will be in town, and you too could have a shot at more than $400 in the Hucket Bucket Challenge. A nice pull from D.C. lands right in front of Kenny Fridella. And the Thunderbirds start their offense with a sense of urgency and the need to score a lot in a little time. And you can bet that DC is not going to give them the opportunity to make easy, deep cuts. But Ethan Beardsley is behind the defense. And he's got a thrower who sees him, but he can't catch up to it. And that's been the problem.
Yeah, another throw letting down Beardsley. And you know, look, you go back to the third quarter, DC outscores Pittsburgh 6-2. And you know, it's almost impossible for Pittsburgh to make up this deficit in this fourth quarter, and it really, that throw is emblematic of what we saw in the third quarter.
Precisely. And
Cutter's open, looking good, missed the throw.
Yep, and Ethan Beardsley has been timing those cuts nicely. And look, if you're DC right now, you have to be thinking, well, we're not going to let that big guy get behind us again. But he manages to find a way to get open. The problem is that his throwers are having trouble sending it into that end zone and giving him enough air underneath it to catch it. A really nice block by Mark Fedorenko, who sort of lay in wait and pounced in front of his former teammate Marcus Thaw. And Watt and Fedorenko playing catch, but that sort of stalls out, so he sends it back to Jonathan Mast. He's got Fridella, but instead decides to find Beardsley in the middle of the field, about 20 yards out. He throws one, and it's just behind Mark Fedorenko. He makes a valiant bid, goes down with that right hand, but it's a trailing hand, and the disc ends up on the carpet again. And Barton Steen's just going to take his time to walk over, put it in play. Marked by Van Duzen, pops a little high-release forehand, kind of wobbly, but Thaw has no trouble corralling it. He then drops one over the right shoulder of his mark to the break side, and it falls to the turf, maybe the wind pushing it down. But again, each exchange favors DC as time becomes very much of the essence. Fedorenko going deep, Mast looks that off. Sends one into the middle of the field, pops it up. Can Van Duzen keep Barton Steen off his back? And he puts his hands out, pleading for a foul call, and we do get a whistle, and I think that he's going to get that call, and I think he actually deserves it. It was a floater, but he definitely felt pressure from the back. He had position.
I don't think there's much of an argument there from the Breeze.
Yeah, Barton Steen, nobody likes to get a foul called on him, so he gave the kind of cursory, pleading look. Watt catches a forehand from Van Duzen and then pops one up in the air. Fridella makes a desperate bid and knocks Fall over. In so doing, Fall doesn't even bother to get all the way up. He finds Boxley.
That should be a 10-yard penalty against the Thunderbirds.
I agree with you.
You know, despite the fact that he made the catch, he makes the catch, then gets fouled. Give him 10 yards.
Agreed, because, you know, Ferdella, understandably desperate to make the catch, but he couldn't make it without undercutting his defender, and that can be a dangerous play. He got fall from the front, so he was able to just bend those knees. But if he'd gotten from the back, we could be looking at a really terrible situation. Instead, Fall was fine and eventually possessed the disc and threw it into the turf to give it back to the Thunderbirds. Fedorenko looking to break but can't. Van Dusen can find Shepard, one of his favorite targets, and I think the feeling is mutual. Beardsley having a really good game, but he's not going to throw it deep to Watt. Watt breaks that one off, and now Van Dusen, who will throw it deep, does so. Let's see if it comes back in bounds. It does not, so it's going to be DC disc further down the field. Van Dusen now trying to make a little bit too much happen, and I think out of gas.
Ugly start to the fourth quarter from both teams. Turnovers in both directions, and time burning off the clock, which of course favors DC.
Sure. You know, I don't think that they mind punting like this as they just did, because when we started this point, we had more than 10 minutes. We're now down to 8, and the score still stands at DC 16, Pittsburgh 9. Mast has the disc. He's got Watt in front of him, and he finally ends this point with 7:53 remaining, and the Thunderbirds claw back to within 6. But they're going to need to find a solution quickly to the DC offense, and I'd say that this point is kind of a last chance situation. You get a quick turnover and score, or you're pretty much playing out the rest of the clock.
Clean score on that final possession. Finally getting the right amount of touch on the forehand up the line. And it's been a tricky throw because of the wind.
But it's a throw that pros have to make.
Indeed. And it's a throw that we've seen players make throughout the game. DC has not necessarily tried as many of the long hucks in that direction upwind, but we've seen Pittsburgh taking a lot of them. Van Dusen hit some early, but they've struggled as a team since then. And that time, though, you know, in a good position, power position, throwing to a well-open cutter, not trying to do too much or go across the field, and a good touch to put it in.
It strikes me that one of the things that separates a team like the Thunderbirds from some of the teams that are above them right now is that they really they have a very small number of guys who are capable of making things happen with their throws. A lot of the time they'll gain yards downfield, but then those receivers almost immediately look to throw it back to a handler. And while you don't need to have handlers all over the field, continuation and flow is a part of this game. And one of the things that's hurting the Thunderbirds today is they're missing a guy who's given that to them, and that's Jimmy Toll. This was just simply one of those situations, and it happens when you're playing in the semi-pro league. Jimmy knew that the one game that he couldn't make was today, and he's not here, but he has been a big guy for both assists and nice catch by Holland there, who gives a little shove to Robarge, who gives it back to him on the cut back. So a little bit of anger and temper, and it looks like they turn to each other, have some words, and the officials are going to come over and speak to them. But Holland took a little exception to Robarge when he went up and pulled that one down and gave him a little zets, as we'd say in Yiddish, a little klop. And Robarge made sure to let him know, and the disc ends up moving 10 yards downfield. But, yeah, Jimmy Toll has been a spark plug for the offense, able to make catches downfield and then turn and make throws, and they've lacked that today, aside from Van Dusen. And we got a travel called, and I think that Kerrigan's upset because he said, I traveled because I was bumped on the mark. Where's my contact foul? And Heim says, nope, you simply walked away.
Yeah, a little chippiness starting to creep into this game with DC leading by 6.
Well, I think the Thunderbirds are unhappy, and sometimes that comes out directed at and you can see Diamichis makes a little bit of a gratuitous bid, and unfortunately, it looks like he catches Khalifa, and we see his team come off the bench to him. Goal is signaled, and I understand Diamichis's eagerness to make a play, but that was already in the hands of the receiver, and I think that he did a little bit of damage on that layout.
See it again. Coming out of the stoppage after some back and forth conversation. Easy catch and a completely unnecessary, totally gratuitous bid.
I mean, he really laid out once the disc was in Khalifa's hands.
And there's no room for that in the AUDL.
No,
or really at any level of Ultimate. I mean, it's one thing to make a last-ditch effort bid, but if you make any contact whatsoever with the offensive player in that situation when you clearly don't have a chance of the disc, and they have to take him off the field now after tweaking his ankle, you could be directly ejected for a play like that. And if nothing else, that should be a yellow card.
I agree with you. And he didn't really have a play on the disc at all. But as you said, he had a big landing zone that he could see there. And, if you end up contacting the receiver, it means that you were laying out into the wrong spot as it was. And you have to hope that that's not a product of those tempers flaring that we were talking about, because it shouldn't happen. And Diamichis is a tremendous athletic player, and he's a defender. I'm sure he's frustrated, but it is no reason to make a play that endangers another player. Absolutely not.
He certainly knew that he didn't have a play at that, and it's just pure frustration coming out. But you hate to see somebody get injured in a situation like that one.
Absolutely. And hopefully Khalifa's going to be all right, but he didn't look comfortable as he left the field. And my guess is we're not going to see him again. We'll hope to be able to look to the sideline and see if he's there. There's a nice bid and a safe one too. And while it doesn't result in a turnover, the next pass is, as it falls out of Fedorenko's hands. Swift picks up the disc. Finds Bergeron coming in. He laces one a little bit low, and hopefully things will chill out a little bit between these two teams. And it looks like we get a travel called. It is not Max Shepard's responsibility to ground check that disc, but it is his responsibility to put it in where it should be put in. And it looks to me like Heim said you ran that a little bit away from your mark and into the middle of the field, and so that's a travel, and they're playing from their end zone. Fidela takes the disc in front of Bergeron, finds Shepard cutting across. He's marked by Johnson. Van Duzen has it, yanks it. Deep is Beardsley. This one just keeps on going. Beardsley, though, mistimes his jump. He had Brad Scott on him, but I don't think Brad Scott was any threat to jump over him.
Good pressure from Scott, though, to
definitely made him commit.
Think about having to go up earlier than he wanted to.
Yep, and that one was one that didn't stall out in the air. It kept on going, and Beardsley could have run under it, but easy for us to make that call up here. And yes, with Scott right on his back, sometimes if you can't make the block, the next best thing you can do is make the receiver choose a point to catch the disc that is not where he wants to. Rico Johnson looks off a couple of opportunities and tries to play a little give and go with an up the line from Reese Bergeron, but the pass is too much for him. Max Shepard is double teamed by Thaw. Johnson on the sideline doesn't have a lot of options. He is an artist with the disc, though, but it looks like he might have gotten stalled out. No timeout was called. He was in danger of being stalled out. And it looks like that timeout is going to come in, and with not a lot of time left on that stall count when play resumes. You don't, I think, get extra seconds when.
I'm pretty sure they reset the stall count on the timeout.
On the timeout, yeah. Okay. Well,
which is one of the nice things about a timeout. Of course, we talked earlier about how you get to substitute players onto the field as you wish, but also getting a reset of that stall can be very valuable in a situation like the one we just saw. It's actually something that I would be curious to see implemented at other levels of Ultimate. I think there's some interesting stuff going on in the rules of the AUDL that could be of interest to the club game or the college game.
In addition to that, what would you like to see possibly instituted in other competition?
Well, I think one of the things that the AUDL does especially well is to create more strategy around the usage of timeouts, and stall count reset is one of those, but particularly the allowing players to substitute. I think that that's an area that is ripe for experimentation, if nothing else, at other levels. And I think we've seen, after many years of the AUDL now, proof that it can work, and it puts your best players on the field in the most intense situations, and that's what you want when you're trying to put on a really good game for the fans.
And Charlie, I think that's the key point that you're making, and that is that up until very recently, this hasn't been a fans game, and there's definitely been there's a culture of toughness and endurance in the game, and one of those things is that you don't come out, and that includes timeouts. But when you're putting on a show, as you said, you don't necessarily want to see guys who are dog-tired play an endless point, because they don't usually make plays like that.
Great block.
Yeah, a really nice block by Quinn Bergeron, who steps in front of Kenny Fridella, and the Thunderbirds were rolling there. They had something going, but that just floated up, and I think that cup was maybe spent before it was thrown. Swift sends one up to Johnson, who has plenty of time to catch up to it. He nicely sends it out to Reese Bergeron, and this is a play that they were drilling. That's one of their opening drills, which I like to watch before every game so that I can master the numbers and the names of the visiting team, and that is exactly the play they were running. A little give and go on the sidelines, a guy starting the strike cut, getting his defender to commit to that up the line, and then turning it into the middle.
Let's take a look. You see Johnson goes up the line, they pump fake that throw, and he goes back out into the break side space, and they know exactly what to do. Put it up for him.
It's rare that you can say, that's just how we drew it up, but that's just how they drew it up. They practiced it, and the opportunity came, and those guys were ready for it. So that brings us to 3 minutes and 37 seconds, and at this point, the outcome is a foregone conclusion. What can each of these two teams take out of what they've seen tonight? Clearly, they're heading in opposite directions, and the Thunderbirds didn't get what they wanted. Can they salvage anything from tonight?
Well, the Thunderbirds, I think, the biggest thing for their team is kind of learning about the weaknesses and the things that they need to fill later in the season, and maybe looking ahead to next year. The areas where they can improve, clearly at the handler position, clearly with their break throws in general. And, I hesitate to say this because it's a game where they're missing some starters, but I think fitness as well. I think we've seen DC outcompete them a little bit, and you don't want to see that at home. So as we see a throw behind the intended receiver, so back over to DC. And so I think, obviously you're not thinking about playoffs as we watch DC put a great shot into the end zone.
Yep, pretty throw, and Boxley runs right underneath it. And that lead almost to 20 right now, almost a double-digit lead. It's 19-10 in favor of the DC Breeze, who have come in here and made a statement. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that it's tough. As you said, they do have some missing players, but if you're not going to be a team that's going to pick the other team apart, then you have to be a team that can run them off the field. And I don't think the Thunderbirds are either right now.
Yeah, and I think the big thing about this for the DC Breeze, and it's another win. It's a win on the road. Yes, it's against a team that struggled a bit this season, but they came out a little flat, DC, and they responded in a big way. And that's all without their best player on the field in Matthew McDonald, and without one of their key O-cutters in Jeff Wodach. And I think that is a sign of the fact that this DC Breeze team is getting better. And they're not going to be a team that you can just count on losing to teams like New York and Toronto in the East if they happen to make the playoffs. With this win here today, they're going to move to 4-4-1, and that's got them right in the mix. And we talked about their schedule a little bit earlier. They've got a couple games coming up against Toronto. Those are going to be tough games, no doubt. But perhaps they can steal one from Toronto playing at home.
And as we're looking ahead on the schedule, and here's one from Mark Fedorenko, which is pulled down on defense by Reese Bergeron. If you look at their schedule, you've got an interesting game that I think people are going to want to tune into the stream of, maybe, and that is the last game of the season for this DC Breeze team, and that's on the 14th of July, and it's against New York. They'll be in New York, and so as they notch yet another score to go up 20-10, that's a game for them to circle and to try to put themselves in a position to
and it's not out of the question that game could be for a playoff seeding or possibly even for the playoffs.
Absolutely.
It's not like New York has done so much that you're sure they're going to make the playoffs. After losing to DC last week, things are up in the air in the East.
Yeah, if you take a look at the East standings, and we'll look at them right now on the AUDL app on my phone, which you should pull up on your phone or your mobile device. It's a great way to keep track of everything that's going on. Toronto, with a great big plus 42 goal differential and a 7-0 win-loss record, as you said, is the king of the division, and nobody looks to dethrone them. But then behind them, there is a logjam. We've got New York, who, as you said, just lost last week and will finish the season against this DC Breeze team. And then right behind them at 3-3 is Ottawa, New York at 3-2. and then DC here, which is going to come out of this today at 4-4-1.
And just to be clear, that Montreal is sitting at 3-3.
Oh, my bad. I'm really sorry about that. These icons are too small for my old eyes.
The Breeze 3-4-1, and then Ottawa at 2-4,
Yep.
and it's Philly in last place. Although they've been a competitive team this year, they're 2-5-1.
And provided that they can, we got a nice throw from Van Duzen, pulled down by Heffron, and unfortunately the scoreboard operator takes a point away from Pittsburgh for that, but it's not 20-9, it's 20-11. Yeah, and you're quite right about that, of course. And one thing I would suggest that for people 50 and over that the AUDL adds is bigger logos. But you're right, Montreal in the middle of that mix. And DC, of course, getting to go to Philadelphia the week before, a couple weeks before their game with New York, and get to replay that match that ended in a bizarre tie. I don't know if there's ever been another tie in the AUDL, but what happened out there was that they kept on getting delayed by lightning, and then they ran out of field permit. They had to give up their field.
The perils of a small league.
Well, I think back to guys who talked about the minor leagues, or certainly Pittsburgh has a wonderful history here of the Negro leagues, the American and National Negro leagues, the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Homestead Grays, and some great history has been done where those guys talk about driving on buses, playing in fields that were set up with cars turning on their headlights to play a night game. And there's a little bit of that barnstorming feel there. And, I'm sure that the Steelers or the Redskins never have to worry about being kicked off the field because they overstayed their permit. But
and even driving around Pittsburgh earlier and taking a look at the skyline, and you can't miss PNC Park and Heinz Field, and perhaps dreaming these Thunderbirds owners of one day having a stadium of their own.
We do have a terrific bid there by Akon, who is just a gutty player, not as physically gifted as some of the other players out here, but a really gutty player. Boxley with the disc now. He sends it back to Pryor. The Thunderbirds did manage to play one playoff game, a win against Minnesota a couple of years ago at Highmark Stadium, which is a beautiful stadium that sits across from Heinz Field. And another big bid, this one from looks like Heffron. And so the Thunderbirds still showing a lot of heart, which is encouraging. These guys are laying out with 1:12 left to go. They are down by 10, and nobody's conceding anything. And if you're Pat Hammonds, the coach, or Tracy and Amy Neuendorf, the owners, Andrew Gardner, the GM, they work really hard, and that's, I think, what they expect to see from their team. I've heard, Tracy talking to the guys who play for him, and he says, hey, we're not expecting to win every time. You guys are working hard and you're trying hard. And of course, in pro sports, eventually it comes down to wins and losses. But 2 layouts on the final point and then a turnover with a chance to maybe end the game with a goal.
That's a great defensive possession.
It really is.
Pittsburgh. I mean, you said it. They're out there working hard. They're not giving up.
And against the guys, that it's not as if DC has found a bunch of guys from. Unfortunately, that one goes right through the hands of the receiver. I didn't see exactly who dropped that. And now Norbaum has it on the far side. But, they did play at this beautiful stadium. It's the Pittsburgh Riverhound Soccer Stadium. And we've had a little trouble negotiating with them to get that to be the home of the Thunderbirds. But it would be a beautiful one right there on the river. And I think we'd settle for that if we could.
Time winding down.
Yep.
That should do it.
Yep.
No need
Doesn't have to throw another pass, and handshakes begin before time expires. And now it has. And so this game, which started promisingly for the home team, the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds, slips away from them somewhere in the second quarter. They just didn't really have the horses to say with DC. The weaknesses that we talked about at the beginning of the game, which they managed to overcome or conceal, they made their appearance. And DC showed what a quality team they are. They did what they're supposed to do, what a playoff contending team is supposed to do to a cellar dweller. They came out, they kept them in the game for a while, but ultimately it wasn't a contest.
Yeah, and it was the third quarter that really did it, in the 3-0 start from DC that led into a 6-2 advantage in that third quarter, adding to their 3-point halftime lead. And really from there it was just coast mode for the Breeze, and they rolled out to a 9-point win here. And that's makes them 2-0 in cross-divisional games this year after they beat Raleigh earlier this season.
Yes, it's it's an accomplishment, and it's something that they didn't necessarily expect. When I talked to Darryl Stanley, their coach, he said when we looked at those 2 cross-divisional games, he said I felt a little resentful because I figured we'd be going up against some really tough teams. And you know, Pittsburgh has been a playoff team 3 years in a row. Raleigh, of course, is a team that everybody expects to contend not just for their division title, but the title. And they've come through the cross-division challenge with 2 wins, and that's going to serve them very well. They don't count as much as interdivisional wins, but they do matter, and they add to the win-loss total, and they're sitting now at 4-4-1.
Well, a compelling game, if ultimately not a very close one, and a strong performance from the Breeze here on the road without some of their top competitors, and that's huge. You know, to get a win without Matthew McDonald out there is a bigger deal than it may seem, even though they were playing a team that came into the game 1-7.
And he's fine. I talked to him, and he said, you know, I said, Coach, this was the playoffs, all the marbles. I tape it up, I'd be out there. So I don't think people should worry about him. Breeze fans should know he'll be back and at full speed. It's just a hamstring. You got to take care of it.
Yeah, he said he's probably going to be back out there next week. So we'll see what we see.
And, hey, I just want to remind folks before we sign off that if you log into the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds Facebook page, please join us tomorrow for this really special event, the Supercell versus DC Breeze Mixed. It's going to be co-ed play at the highest level, played by AUDL rules, and we're real excited about it. I think it bodes well for the league going forward.
Well, that's going to do it from Pittsburgh. It's the DC Breeze getting the win. They move to 4-4-1, and the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds fall to 1-8 as they go down 20-11 here on the road. And so it's the win for the Breeze. And for Matt Weiss and our entire crew, I'm Charlie Eisenhood signing off from AUDL Extra, presented by UltiWorld. Thanks for joining us.